church made you afraid of heaven, not hell, heaven. Because I'm going to tell you what it feels like to believe in heaven in the church. It feels like studying for an exam with no right answers. It feels like walking on a balance beam so thin you couldn't even breathe without thinking you fall. I just want you to understand it comes off like joy is suspicious there, like warmth is dangerous there, and that even warning heaven is an arrogant gesture. You didn't even rest in that spot, you rehearsed it. Every prayer, every thought, every action gets graded in your imagination like marks on the Scantron, and in that fear, heaven felt further away than hell. Because at least hell you understood. At least you understood hell. But heaven, you were terrified to even want it. I just want you to understand this. I'm going to say it extra clearly just for you. You were never supposed to fear your ability to go to heaven. You weren't. I just want you to stay with how wild this is. Let's stay rational for a second, because it should be the most obvious thing in the world that heaven is open, wholeness, warmth, and belonging. You were made for it. That makes sense. But instead, your body is braced as if heaven was a trap waiting to catch you in arrogance. It shouldn't even be possible to conceive of a test to enter heaven. I want you to understand what I'm talking about. But guess what they did? They built one. And then they embarrassed Jesus by making him the gatekeeper. Think about that. The one who broke bread with outcasts. The one who said, "Come to me, all who are weary." All. The one who tore the veil in the temple, not to close the door, but to open it. He's your security guard with a clipboard. That's what's going on. I can tell you what else you turned him to. A gatekeeper who keeps people out instead of welcoming them in. And for some of you, Jesus was even painted as a guard dog in your images, snarling at the edges of heaven's gates, ready to turn you away if you ever misstepped. No wonder you were afraid. No wonder you kept studying. Because if even Jesus can reject you, what hope did you have? What? And people act like it's some kind of situation to play dumb about. But it's not. And that was never Jesus. Because Jesus didn't guard the gates. He was the gate. And if you don't understand, he was flung wide open, not to filter you out, but to draw you into belonging that was already yours. That's why he makes sense. That's why it even makes sense. But it doesn't make sense if you don't belong. Oh, see, you're not catching it. Because dying was never about going to heaven. It wasn't. That's a modern invention. In the scriptures, the language is far simpler. I just want to say it. You died and you went to God, the source, the breath, the return. It was not about architecture in the clouds, but empire turned your rest into anxiety. Heaven becomes a spectacle. Pearly gates, golden streets, stitched together by Greco-Roman Elysium and imperial marketing. Because if death could be returned, if death was just returning to God, you could rest in belonging right now, but we can't have that. We can't have that. But if heaven was a gated community, then fear could keep you compliant. And fear is exactly what you learn to trust. So let's talk about hell for a second. Because hell is also the shadow play. It's not God's torture chamber. If you've been living like that, hoping that your God had a torture chamber, we're not even on the same team. I just want to say that. Because it's not a place for people that God couldn't stand. That's not what that is. Hell is what life already feels like when you're cut off from presence. Already feels like. People go through hell all the time. You're just deaf. I just want to say what this is, right? What's going on really at its core is that hell is a suspicion so thick you can't rest. That's what hell is. It's a constant bracing. It's the fear that joy itself is too much and that belonging is a form of arrogance. So of course the test felt harder than hell. Of course, because hell you already knew and hell was the ache you were living under. But heaven, they made you believe you couldn't deserve it or didn't deserve it. But I want to fully break down the idea for you so that way you can feel better about what's going on. Because if the exam is real, then God himself will be forcing you to live afraid of him. Forcing you. But you already knew that wasn't true. So the test was never God's then. And if you ain't ready to say that, we're not talking about the same thing, because the Scantron is the empire's leash and gatekeeper Jesus was the empire's embarrassment. That fear is just a hijack. I just want you to understand it's not possible to audition for heaven. You don't balance your way into heaven. You do not test into God. Heaven is just a prize. The heaven you've always fantasized about is a trophy on a white man's shelf. But God, you always belong to God. You always belong to a source. That's the facts right there. You were always theirs. I just want you to understand that. You were always home. I just want you to understand that fear was never proof. It was the problem. It was the wound. And you don't have to study for heaven anymore. Because that's not what it is. You belong. Already. But if you know anything about empires is that their state of uprootedness will always interfere with somebody else's state of belonging.